to you. It is a Thursday night and you're with Economics Unbound, our weekly show. Welcome to it. I'm Francis Hood, standing in for Tendeka Ngobule. And as always, I'm not alone, but here with our inimitable co-anchor, Nana.
Hello to our viewers. Tonight we're looking into debt. We take a closer look into both personal debt and government debt.
Yes, Nana. So the Finance Minister has warned that South Africa is living on the edge, basically living on a giant credit card. We're spending beyond our means and heading towards a debt trap, meaning it'll be hard to get out of. Excuse me. That's coming up a little bit later on the show. First, let's look at individual South Africans who are spending on their credit cards just to buy food. The National Credit Regulator's second quarterly credit bureau monitor revealed that many consumers spend most of their disposable income on servicing debt. Isn't that so, Nana?
It was revealed that despite the flat economy, consumers have debt amounting to 1.9 trillion rand as of June 2019, more than 260 billion of which is due to unsecured credit retail accounts, credit cards and loans, while 959 billion is owed for home loans.
So 1.9 trillion rand in debt when we should be saving. Nana, experts say some of this debt was offered recklessly without proper assessments of the consumer's level of indebtedness. Let's start with taking a look at that.
Many consumers are battling to cope with the high cost of living. Soaring electricity, water, food and transport costs are adding to the burden. Credit providers are capitalizing on this by offering them credit that they cannot afford. Some consumers see this as a quick fix to deal with their financial problems and do not scrutinize the interest they are being charged. There are about 25.10 million credit active consumers and about 10.23 million consumers have impaired records, meaning they are 3 months in arrears with their repayments.
There's no question that those consumers are living beyond their means, and there's a natural belief that if I'm in financial trouble, one additional loan will solve my problems. And that it's in many cases is marketed as that. So it's too easy to get more money. Instead of facing the problem, they're actually funding the debt with more debt. And that's at the core of the problem. And then they end up with a position where they run out of options in terms of debt. They actually take long-term loans. If those are declined, they go to the shorter-term loan companies and they get them approved. And they end up with a cash flow problem that they can't solve.
According to recent research conducted by financial services company Octagen, consumers spend about 63% of their after-tax income to service debt and spend only 5% on financial services such as insurance and medical aid. 32% of their income goes to household expenditure such as groceries and transport.
The cost of living has increased and is still increasing every day. We can just think about the petrol price, the electricity prices increases, food prices is increasing. So there's a cost pressure element that the consumers have to face. And then there's this existing debt pressure that they have. Now, if you already committed 63% of your income to debt, you don't have much to play with. And we're certainly seeing there's an increased number of consumers that will end up in trouble. And some of them actually resigned to get their hands on their pension fund, and that's not a good thing. And two, I think we're probably heading for a debt bubble like we had many years ago, where there's simply too much debt with a certain sector of the economy.
Easy access to credit is leading to many consumers taking on more credit than they can afford. This is contributing to the high levels of indebtedness among consumers. Consumers currently spend about 75% of their annual income to service debt. Octagen says it has seen an increase in the number of people applying for debt review. A debt counselor can negotiate a better interest rate for you with your credit providers, but you cannot take on more credit when you are under debt review. Slot says some of the credit offered to consumers is reckless.
Reckless credit has not been pursued for many years. In terms of the National Credit Amendment Act, it's compulsory to actually do it, and we're certainly seeing a lot of improvement in the compliance monitoring of reckless credit. We have seen in order to be reckless, for something to be reckless, there must be proof of income. There must, number two, is that they have to prevent reckless credit by making sure that the consumer can afford it, and then they do the affordability assessment. We see fairly high compliance in proof of payment, but we see low compliance in the ability to check for can they actually really afford it? Is it realistic? Can that family actually support that payment? And that's where I think we're getting a lot of credit providers who actually accept that the money has been approved not in line with the National Credit Act.
With the cost of living increasing, high unemployment rate, and a salary depression, some credit providers seem to be capitalizing on this by offering desperate consumers credit they cannot afford. Those turned down for loans by credit providers are also likely to turn to loan sharks for survival.
Unfortunately, Nana, so to discuss, we're joined by Ngwako Mabeba, who is the Manager Statistics at the National Credit Regulator. Great to have you with us, Ngwako.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
So, are we slaves to debt, as one report put it?
The National Credit Regulator is very concerned about the rising level of credit extension that we've seen, especially in the third quarter. It may not be so clear as looking at credit extension, but if you look at the balances that we're actually owing, it's a total of 1.9 trillion. And the majority of it, of course, about 10% is on unsecured personal loans. So we are very concerned about that kind of situation.
So there's a stat of 25 million active credit consumers, more than 10 million, or 40% are behind on their payments. Is that correct? That sounds huge.
That is very significant, but take it in conjunction with the number of accounts. We've got about 80 million credit active accounts. About 20% are impaired. So that is correct, but the driver is that consumers are classified once in their worst position. So if I have 5 accounts and one of them is impaired, I'm classified as an impaired consumer. But nonetheless, we are very concerned about consumers lagging behind. One consumer impaired is one too much for the regulator.
So, but that means we're heading to almost 1 in 2 credit consumers being behind on one of their payments. Is that correct?
We are hoping to turn around the situation. There's been legislative interventions that actually came through to actually make sure that we turn the corner, including affordability assessment regulation, which are supposed to make sure that the credit provider does do proper assessment before consumers are actually granted credit.
So what's happening with that law? Because I remember years ago, I've been doing this long enough, to remember when laws were tightened up. Seriously, to prevent reckless lending. Why are we talking about reckless lending right now?
It is in place. You'd have rogue credit providers that would take their chances from time to time. But based on the statistics, we are further, I would say, deep diving to make sure and actually check if there are any credit agreements that can be regarded as reckless. We're definitely looking at that. The law is in place, it's being enforced.
Yeah, but there must be.
It is.
What are you finding? What are you seeing?
There are instances of recklessness, and the regulator does take measures in conjunction with the tribunal, National Consumer Tribunal. And in such instances, there's recourse that is actually given to the consumer, including maybe removing interest and consumers only paying the capital portion. So there's a variety of measures that we have in place that we assist consumers with.
But these are consumers in financial trouble. You know, it costs money maybe, or does it, to try and appeal to the National Credit Regulator, time as well. They're trying to work to pay off their debts. So do you think a lot of this is hidden, if I can put it that way?
Not necessarily hidden. I think the key message there is that credit is costly. I think it's a message that we need to put across. It's not going to dig you out of trouble. If you are in debt, you can't get yourself through debt again. You just have to put in place austerity measures, cut on the spending, live within your means. I think that's a message that we're actually trying to put across, because credit comes with initiation fees, it comes with service fees, it comes with credit life. All of those are adding to indebting the consumer even more. One of the measures that we've actually taken relating to short-term credit was to reduce the cap. It used to be about 5% per month. It was taken down to 3% on the subsequent loan in any financial year. So there's quite a lot of measures that we're actually doing as the regulator to make sure that the consumer is assisted, but the consumer must assist by actually living within their means.
Yeah. The big question, I mean, can these good laws that are meant to protect against reckless lending be enforced? Are there the resources to go out and find all these reckless lenders?
We do have capacity as the regulator. We do have a compliance department that are actually looking at this. From time to time, they visit credit providers, they take samples of credit agreements, and where there is reckless lending, strict enforcement is actually being undertaken.
So give me an example of a lender being punished.
I think there was African Bank where some measures were actually taken. I think that's the most famous one. But I don't have...
But that was a while ago.
Indeed. I don't have recent names. But from time to time, we do deregister credit providers that are not, I would say, complying. Yeah. We do deregister debt counselors that are not complying with the law. So we do have teeth, we do use it.
Are the big companies in South Africa compliant?
Generally, your big credit providers are compliant. I think it's
so the banks, the furniture suppliers, etc.
You do have instances. We recently took one of the retailers to court where there was charges that we thought are not supposed to be included as part and parcel of the cost of credit. Unfortunately, we did lose that case. We are currently dealing with instances where I would say your vehicle financiers are actually charging some cost that we think should not be included, the transportation cost.
Tell me more. If I'm looking for a car, what should I look out for?
I think importantly for consumers, what you've been told, your interest rate is not gospel truth. You have the right to negotiate that. If they tell you these are the repayment terms, you can negotiate that. The credit life, you have an option to substitute. But I think as a consumer, go out, do comparative shopping, and get the best rate as a consumer.
So I had this discussion with one of the banks years ago, looking at people who buy couches, say, and you can pay off a couch for years, right? It's incredible. Their argument was, why should only the rich be able to access credit? Who's to say that a poor person shouldn't be able to, if they want a couch, get it? But are people starting to become aware of how long you can pay off, the T's and C's, the fine print? Or is there still a major problem with financial literacy?
Financial literacy, it's a challenge in the entire republic. And we have an education department that is actually going around doing workshop, meeting unions, to actually educate the consumer. Because those issues of options, some of the consumers are not really aware that you can shop around, you can negotiate with your credit provider. And so those are some of the things that we're really going out of our way to teach the consumer that they have rights. And our mandate, which is rather to balance the access to credit with making sure that those that actually get it can actually afford to pay it back.
How much interest can a retailer charge on something like a couch? And what are you doing to make people aware of how much trouble they can get into with an item like that?
I would say if you're buying a couch through credit, you assuming the price was, let's say, 5,000. If you were to buy it on an extended, let's say, term, you could end up paying 9,000, which is almost double.
Almost double.
Yes. It's not advisable, but not everybody is got cash ready and we need those assets. We're not necessarily discouraging credit extension, but we're saying when credit is being extended, it must be for asset building purposes, because you need to balance between access to, I would say, finance and reckless lending on the other hand. So that essentially is the core of our mandate. We can't close up the taps, but at the same time, we can't open them all the way in a reckless way.
Finally, your stance on the new bill talking about debt relief under certain circumstances, will that encourage more lending, or is it useful?
I think every bill, when it's introduced, you do have teething issues. It is going to solve, because if you look at the debt cancelling, it doesn't accommodate a typical consumer who is unemployed today. You need to be employed so that debt cancellers can be in a position to make repayment arrangements. So that typical consumer is not accommodated. Consumers that would be retrenched as well. So I think that's where the debt intervention bill is actually coming in to accommodate. But it's not going to be a clean slate, and consumers shouldn't expect write-offs.
All right, well, let's hope this situation, almost 1 in 2, or 40% at the moment, of people who are credit active having a problematic account. Thank you very much for that explanation, Gwako Mabeba from the National Credit Regulator. And we take a short break. We'll be back, and then we look at the bigger picture, South Africa's national debt. In a sense, there we're also living way beyond our means on some sort of credit card. We'll be back. Welcome back to Economics Unbound. I'm Frances Hurd, standing in for Tandeka Ngobule tonight. Moving from personal debt to our national debt. Of course, yesterday the Finance Minister revealed that South Africa as a country owes more than 3 trillion rand. If nothing changes, he said that's expected to rise to 4 trillion over the next 3 years. That means debt could exceed 70% of GDP, or the total annual economic output, by 2022.
Our problem is that we spend more than we earn. It is as simple as that. How will we fix it? Because we are a leadership, we are not a complaining society. To stabilize debt, government will target a primary balance by 2022-23. Primary balance means that your revenue and expenditure, that must give you a number of 0%. Now I'm helping you because I can see you're struggling. The target measure excludes support to Eskom because that is part of a separate process. As a first step, we have identified spending reductions of 21 billion rand in 2020-21, 29 billion rand in 21-22, mostly, unfortunately, in the area of goods and services and transfers. In addition, non-interest spending in the outer years of the framework is constrained in line with the consumer price inflation. That said, if we want to achieve our target, we'll need to find additional measures in excess of 150 billion rand over the next 3 years, or about 50 billion rand a year.
Rating agency Moodys' main concern is the direction of structural reform. Last month, the agency also raised concerns about Eskom. It said a 128 billion 3-year package for the power producer will add to state liabilities and widen the budget deficit.
So yes, Nana, Moodys could see this as credit negative. The credit rating agency could, in fact, downgrade South Africa's sovereign credit rating tomorrow if it believes we're not doing enough to rein in that debt. Experts say the recent power cuts will further weigh on the economic outlook and raise the prospect of the state having to cough up even more bailout funds in future.
If Moodys downgrades us one more time, what does this mean for the country?
Well, you see, Nana, a junk rating means the agency believes there is a bigger chance that government won't be able to pay back its creditors. So that affects our borrowing costs, the interest that we are charged, already one of the highest climbing items on the budget. Remember, S&P Global Rating and Fitch Rating both cut South Africa to junk in 2017. So if we also lose Moody's investment grade rating, that means we could be left without any investment grade ranking for the first time in 25 years. Reports suggest South Africa will then fall out of key debt gauges, including the FTSE World Government Bond Index, which according to the IMF estimates could trigger forced outflows of about 20 billion rand. That, in a nutshell, is one of the last things that we need right now. All right, so tonight on Economics Unbound, we're looking at these mountains of debt. South Africans amassing nearly 2 trillion in debt as a country. We owe 3 trillion or so to creditors, and the finance minister sounding the alarm on a debt trap this week. We're in tenterhooks tonight because Moody's, the final rating agency that has us on that investment grade, could possibly downgrade us, with those implications tomorrow. To discuss, we're now joined by Professor Hinanya Eita, who is head of academics at UJ School of Business and Economics, and Mialane Mkabela, who is Answisa Chief Executive Officer. Welcome to you both. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, Professor, let me start with you. Moody's downgrade, let's just get your predictions, both, Professor.
Yes, I think
a possibility.
It is a possibility. We are actually in the risk, we are facing the risk of being downgraded to junk status, and that is not going to be good for the South African economy. You see, what normally happens is that rating agencies look at economies, they look at whether the economy will be able to honor its loan or debt obligation. So now, if you look at what has been happening, or what is happening in the South African economy, you have a situation where debt is increasing at an increasing rate. So it is now above 50%. So it actually raises questions on fiscal sustainability of South Africa. So they are now watching us to whether we will be able to honor our payment obligations.
What does that mean? At what point are we not able perhaps to pay creditors and we have to go cap in hand to the IMF or another big global lender? That's the big concern. Or like some of the countries we've seen, we can't pay government wages.
Yes. You see, if you look at what the minister presented yesterday, those numbers were depressing. If you expect the debt to reach 71% of GDP, currently it is at around 60%. So now, if it is expected to increase to 70%, that's actually it is increasing at a fast rate. Now, the question is, will we be able to honor our debt obligation? And that is actually resulting from the fact that we are not collecting enough revenue. And it's not surprising simply because South Africa is experiencing a low economic growth. The growth rate is actually expected to be less than 1%, 0.5 for 2009, and just about 1.2% in the next year. So that is really low. Now you could see these numbers, or the budget yesterday was presented at a time when unemployment rate reached 29.1%. Now, that is the narrow definition of unemployment. If you were to look at the broader definition of unemployment, you're looking at 41%. Now, if you have people that are losing the job, it actually impacts negatively on the ability to raise more tax revenue. In other words, your tax base is actually...
So we're on this downward spiral.
Yes.
Everything leading to that.
Yes.
And the Rand, Mialani, saw its biggest one-day dive yesterday, I think for a year. Was that all because of the debt burden?
Thanks. And when you look on the fall of rent by about 4% yesterday, just after the medium-term budget policy speech, it is precisely a sign of investors mainly not accepting the speech. So when the speech does not attract the investors, such indications you will start to see, because it will be a lot of switching of funds. And then now, you find that the rent is as well not being attractive, because more people are as well switching and probably investing in other aspects.
So they wanted more cost-cutting measures, basically.
Not really that. I think what the finance minister gave a rich picture with regard to the challenges that South Africa is experiencing. And then with regard to that, we all know the challenges that the country is experiencing. But what is needed is how do you create economic growth in these challenging times? And solutions are there, but you really need to think deeper on what other measures can we come up with to take the economy out of the pit, and then we create jobs. And when you look on investors who are clients of rating agencies, they are really looking at, is this economy going to create economic growth? Will that economic growth create jobs? At the same time, do we have other mechanisms that we can come up with to ensure that we manage our finances or our expenditure, so that we can be able to make a repayment to the budget? So there is such challenges, and when you look at it broadly, you can see that South Africa from 2008, it has been having almost around 27%, while Thabo Mbeki was like a president. And then when you look at 2011, debt was 31%. It went to 34%, 31%, 34%, 38%, 41%, and it has been growing with a very fast pace. And when you look on the other hand, the budget that the former president was committing, it was this trillion budget that was committed, of which that trillion budget was not really assisting the economy to create jobs. And hence we are left with this debt that the economy, or the budget that was presented in the past years during Jacob Zuma's time, it was really a challenge for the economy. Yeah. And all the borrowings were not injected to benefit the country, to make economic growth, so that the same country can be able to pay the debts. But now you find 2017, 2018 and 2019, Cyril Ramaphosa just inherited this debt. And now with Tito Mboweni, they are expected to come up with measures like what Thabo Mbeki did and repay the debt, probably to be back to your 27% or 25%. And that will be a very good measure that we can do, unless we are having the next finance minister to be in a trap of a 70% debt to GDP.
Mean huge sacrifices, surely. Professor, do you think South Africa is willing to make the sacrifices needed to sort of unravel this and get out of this debt trap?
Yeah, I think there was something interesting that came out from during the speech yesterday, where the finance minister was talking about some consolidation, like reducing expenditure gradually. But the other thing that he has mentioned is that because we want to ensure that the fiscal sustainability of South Africa is not jeopardized, we need to do something. And he referred to primary balance. Remember, we are currently spending more money than we have. Now, when we say primary balance, it means that we have to spend, or what we spend should be equal to our revenue. In other words, our revenue should be equal to expenditure. This is something that will help us to attain fiscal sustainability. Now, if we cannot achieve primary balance, then we need a higher economic growth. That higher economic growth should be able to generate the much needed jobs, and when you are able to generate the much needed job, you'll be able to generate more tax revenue. And if you are able to collect more tax revenue, then you'll be able to reduce your debt. So,
is it possible? I mean, there's one economic theory: spend yourself out of the trap. You know, don't do those austerity measures. Just tell us quickly your view. Is it possible to get economic growth? Because it seems like we can't. So then is our only option to cut costs right now?
I think if you look at the statement that has been coming either from the Treasury or from the Presidency, they have been sending the right messages that are aimed at ensuring that we get the much needed investment, which will translate in higher economic growth. Now, there is what we call a policy lag. It will take some time for the effect of the policy or those statements to be felt. Probably in the short to medium term, or in the short term, we may not really be able to see the effect of what is currently happening, but in the long term, we'll be able to see that effect. And I think one of the reasons why we are experiencing low economic growth is partly due to the fact that we have low investment sentiment. And looking at the statement that has been coming from the government, we hope that in the at least medium to long term, we will feel the effect of those policies or messages.
Okay, but that doesn't help us right now.
Yes.
Mialani, I remember looking back when we were saying let's cap debt at 30%, let's cap it at 40%. Does it feel like for a very long time South Africa has been talking about curtailing debt, but it just has not been happening?
No, it has been happening because Thabo Mbeki has managed to take it down under his presidency. South Africans were very
Those were
happy.
better economic years, were they?
Yes, but like South Africans were happy in seeing South Africa presenting a trillion budget. You know, a 1.2 trillion, 1.4 trillion budget, while that budget is not really committed to benefit industries, because during the very same time, the second term of Jacob Zuma, they should have implemented all the 12 industrial development zones, or all the 12 special economic zones. And those special economic zones being signed so long were not taken to the market because the money was not going there. So that is the cause of the problems. And those industrial zones, now they were supposed to be creating jobs like your other 5 industrial zones that are operating, that are probably a bit boosting the South African economy.
So we've been spending, but it's not productive spending.
We have been borrowing and not directing money to where it is supposed to be going. And that's where probably we can speak about systematic corruption is a threat to economic growth, a developmental state, and job creation. And that's what we experienced in the past 7 years under that tenure. And we are left with this debt. And, you know, consciously, South Africans, we need to be very, very conscious in looking at guarding the country and be, very committed and passionate in looking after government. And we mustn't think private sector is an imported thing. Government is an imported thing that is something that we have. And if we don't have government, all these private sector companies, they are going to leave us. And it's a call to all South Africans to as well, be activists of governance and accountability wherever they work, because that is one of the issues that can take as well the country to continuous capabilities. Looking at your like Singapore, it has, it is having a surplus. They are spending less than what they are like receiving. And then you look at Germany, it is having about 2.2 surplus. And then when you look at Russia, it has about 2.7 surplus. And we really need to operate and have discipline to that level so that we can have this country to be in order and attract more investors to the country.
Okay, well, let's pick up after a break. I think we've looked at the problem. Maybe we can come up with some more solutions, how to cut costs or how to get that economic growth. That was Professor Hinanye Eita from the UJ School of Economics and CEO of Answisa, Miyalane Mkabela. We take a short break. We'll be back. All right, let's pick up our discussion. Professor Hinanye Eita from the UJ School of Economics and Miyalane Mkabela from Answisa. And we were talking before about all the issues. Let me just ask you first, both of you, given the cost-cutting measures that Tito Mboweni, the finance minister, has been talking about, are we looking at higher taxes next year? Definitely, Professor.
Yeah. Maybe just to start, you see, the minister is there to make a contribution to the execution of a political mandate, where he is expected to ensure that jobs are not being lost in the economy. Now, he also needs to balance. He needs to find a balance because rating agencies are watching us. Basically, we cannot, yes, it's not necessarily a problem to borrow, but borrow up to the point where you still be able to honor your payment obligations. Now, if we find ourselves in a situation where the fiscal space is becoming unsustainable, and we find ourselves in a situation where we are downgraded, that will not be good for South Africa. I know that there is a debate, there is always a debate on whether we should take rating agencies serious or we should not take them serious. But I think in an economy where about a third of debts are owned by foreign investors, we have to be concerned. Because what will happen is that if we are downgraded, then it means that the borrowing costs for South Africa will be high, and if they are high, basically consumers will be negatively affected. And what will happen is that, remember, the fund managers that are acting on behalf of investors are expected to invest in assets or bonds that are investment grade. Now, if we are downgraded to junk status, you see what will happen. So the cost will be transferred to consumers.
Yeah. And of course, that's taking up education, social spending.
Yes.
We're spending more on borrowing or paying back those creditors.
Yes, we will have less money available for us to spend on school fees, to buy food, and to spend on social, for example, grants and all that.
So you raised this issue that I think is a big one in South Africa. Some would say, Miyalane, that we have intractable politics because you were talking about this balance. Is it possible to get out of the debt trap while protecting each and every job at Eskom, say? Kusatu is saying not one job should go. Is that a balance that can be found? Can it be done?
Yes, it is possible, because when you look at it and what I have indicated earlier, I said when the budget is allocated and it is not used for what it is expected or what it is desired to be used, there is nothing that the country or the economy will benefit from that amount, because the money is not going to the department or the industry. It is just like before in a pipe, the pipe is cutted, and then before money reaches where it is expected to reach, that money is no longer
there.
You're
talking about
that
corruption again.
Yes, that systematic corruption happens to be a critical aspect. But with Tito Mboweni, we are speaking about someone who is very disciplined with regard to financial management, and we have a belief in him that since he is there, the measures that he's going to take, they are going to lead us in a right direction. That, the trust that we have in the finance minister. And I'm not saying other people are not there, but I think this is one candidate that we can probably trust on, and the measures that is starting to take, making sure that like all government employees or executive government employees, including parastatals, their bonuses is cutted, and making sure that their remuneration as well are freezed to their current levels. So that will assist a bit to a particular degree, and we can probably have another money that we can use for certain things. But what is needed in the main is the foreign direct investor. So now we are expected to partner with companies that will be interested to create industries and manufacturing centers here in South Africa. And in that regard, here you are speaking about FDI, and then with FDI, investors put money for a longer time, and then they are not as well exiting when they don't wake up and exit like what we have seen yesterday, reflections of anything that causes like some cyclicals. But you look at investors that are investing for 10 years, 20 years, because they come in here, they build a plant, and then from there they start to manufacture. They come with this agro-processing, steel manufacturing, electronics, and those are the things that South Africa needs, because we expect to create more jobs, and then SARS will have more people to get tax from.
Sure, but we're not seeing them coming in en masse. Let me ask the professor what he thinks. I mean, should we keep hoping that the foreigners are going to come in en masse?
Yeah, I think just before I answer that, I just wanted to pick up on the issue of jobs. Like unions are saying no jobs should be lost. I think we are at a point where we're talking about the fourth industrial revolution. We have seen companies that are retrenching workers, and they are at loggerheads with union. So how do we solve that problem? We need to reskill. We need to reskill our employees.
But do we have the time to do that?
Yes, we still need to...
Because my question is it going far enough to cap bonuses, to cap cell phone accounts, and cap the cars that the parliamentarians and the ministers can drive? When some would say that there are people not adding value to Eskom, for example, but we're protecting their jobs in the interim. And are we going far enough?
Yeah, I think what is actually happening is that back again to the fourth industrial revolution, that some of the jobs will be negatively affected, but if you are able to reskill those employees, they will be able to cope with what is going to be created because of technology. But then back to the issue of investment. Yes, we have seen positive messages coming from the government, either Treasury or the presidency. And earlier I mentioned that there is what we call a policy lag. Okay? It may not be felt within a short term, but I think after some times, in the medium to long term, we will start seeing the effect of those positive messages. So, and we hope that those positive messages, particularly attracting investment. I think we have seen what has been happening, the investment conference that took place in South Africa, where several investors pledged to invest in South Africa. We hope that what has been happening will translate into an increase in investment in South Africa. And I think sentiments, particularly when it comes to investment, I think we expect an improvement in that.
I think
how long?
If I can probably try to clarify something from South Africa, as you know, our community of commentators as well. I think we need to understand one part. Technology is not there to replace people. Technology is there to assist people work far better. The theme or the myth of saying the fourth industrial revolution will impact employees, when the fourth industrial revolution is implemented wrongly, like what is happening with a lot of companies, it will affect, because such companies, they don't know what is the fourth industrial revolution. The fourth industrial revolution
What do
is
you
just
mean they're implementing it incorrectly?
implementing the fourth industrial revolution wrongly is one, not preparing your employees for the fourth industrial revolution, because you need to prepare employees for the fourth industrial revolution. There we speak about reskilling. The second aspect is South African companies and the banks mainly, they are looking at removing employees or retrenching employees and invest in technology. That is wrong implementation of the fourth industrial revolution, and their advisors are wrong because they just read one statement and try to probably give a guidance. The fourth industrial revolution will be with us. In 5 years, we are going to the fifth industrial revolution, because the machines of the fifth industrial revolutions have been started to be manufactured by Germany, China, and Japan, which means other countries are already entering the fifth industrial revolution in terms of manufacturing such machines. South Africa is behind, but what we need to attend to is we need to be conscious enough and make sure that the economy is run well. The example that I want to give you is when I was analyzing mining strikes 2012, 2013, 2014, I realized that South African mining companies were not conscious, and the mining sector went down completely. And these are some of the things that we don't have to do. We need to talk well with our all our stakeholders, and we ensure that this is one country, and this country unite as a rainbow nation. Employees are imported like employers, and the machines are just to serve the employer and the employee, so that we arrive home not being tired, all of us.
Do you honestly believe the banks could have waited, given that branches, people aren't going to branches anymore? What was there time to upskill those branch workers? Because this is a huge issue. What do you do when people's jobs become redundant quite quickly?
Like what normally happens is one of the things the banks should have started to implement trainings, reskilling about 5 years back. And those employees now, they should have been into coding, into other things, because now they will have been prepared to other markets that the banks have seen that we are going to lose about 40% of our staff component. So what we do, let's train this staff component, let's equip them, let's use enterprise development that we have, let's mainstream them to these new industries. But South African corporates, they are not assisting the employees that they want to retrench in the future in creating the industries of the future. When the time comes, they just retrench employees, and that is wrong implementation of the fourth industrial revolution, because they have bad advisors that read only the quotes on Twitter and go and advise. We need to read all these documents and we understand them in the South African context. You can't understand this, the fourth industrial revolution in a European way or Switzerland way. You need to come into South Africa and say, what is the fourth industrial revolution in Africa? And then you will advise people very well.
Okay, Prof, let me give you the last word, because what you're alluding to is this, we were talking about it earlier, social compact, where labor, government and business works together, where jobs are not lost, but somehow we find our way out of this debt trap. Investors looking at the rand are saying it's impossible. The finance minister didn't go far enough. They wanted something strong. Is that social compact possible for South Africa?
I believe that is possible. I think if we implement what we said, then it is possible. One of the things that has been mentioned by the Minister of Finance yesterday, he mentioned that there are several areas that are declared as special economic zones. So now those are areas that are expected to attract investment, because in special economic zones, there are incentives. Those incentives are aimed at accelerating investment. And when you accelerating investment, you will be able to achieve higher economic growth. And if you achieve higher economic growth, you will be able to generate more jobs and increase your tax base. Because one important thing, I'm sure you remember when he was saying a one-to-one relationship between economic growth and tax revenue. It is economic growth that will enable us as South Africans to be able to collect more revenue and finance our expenditure. So then we'll be able to reduce our deficit, and we'll be able to reduce our debts and ensure that South Africa has a fiscal policy that is sustainable.
Okay, so let's hope that Moodys gives us a pass tomorrow and we have a chance to at least try. And thank you both for a very interesting discussion tonight. That was Professor Hinanye Eita from the UJ School of Economics and CEO of Antwisa, Miyalani Mkabela. And that's it from me and the Economics Unbound team. Tandeka will be back with you next week. I'll see you in the interim on other shows on SABC News. Thank you for being with us.